They are icons of comedy and an American institution. 3 characters that are part of the very fabric of popular culture.
I ought to know. One of them was my father.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Just how do you grapple with the fact that the apple never falls far from the tree? Well, it landed with a clunk, slap, plop, when it came to me. My source of frustration was my dad's occupation. He's a stooge. Oh no, egad! Hey Mo! Hey Mo! Hey Mo! Hey Mo! Hey Dad! I always hope to be an ordinary Joe, a face in the crowd, John Doe. But just my luck, I'm born son of Mo. I never nyuk for my father, and it wouldn't be Mo if I had my brothers. And oh, by the way, take a look at his brothers. Hey Mo, hey Mo, hey Mo, hey Mo, hey Dad. Blinking, something got me to thinking how my dad was always for real. It hit me with a bonk, boom, crash, is what it took to get me to feel. Well, now I ain't hiding and I'm swelling with pride, along for the ride and glad. So here's the 3 Stooges story in all his knucklehead glory. It ain't just a passing fad. Hey Mo, hey Larry, hey Uncle Curly, Uncle Shep, hey Joe and Curly Joe. Hey Mo, hey Mo, hey Dad, Kerplop.
If my father, Mo Howard, was the undisputed king of the act known as the 3 Stooges, then his uniquely gifted younger brother Curly was undoubtedly its crown prince.
Oh, cutie pie.
Yeah.
But like many a monarch before him, my uncle was to wear his crown upon a troubled brow.
He hid behind that clown mask pretty well. When he was performing, he was great. He was just great.
It was as Babe that he grew up. It was as Jerome that he grew older and a bit wiser. But it was as Curly that he grew into his role as one of filmdom's most iconic and most admired comedians.
I got it. Me like that one. What? Oh, wait a minute. Now.
Hey, buddy, what kind of language is that? Oh, deaf and dumb.
Certainly. A victim's circumstance. But I'll do it.
Curly would kind of just follow along. He was like the little kid in a gang. You know, there's the leader, and then there's the kid in the middle who kind of like He'll pretty much do what the guy in charge says, and then there's this little one that doesn't know which way to wander.
There was something about Curly. There was just something, you wanted to be his friend. Like, I knew I was a little kid and couldn't hang out, but I knew that he was a guy I would like to say, how you doing today? What's happening with you?
There's no denying the fact that there was something special about Curly. Moe and Larry were brilliant comedians, as Shemp had been when he was part of the act. And they each had their own signature styles and their own unique comic craft. But Curly was just different. His performances jumping off the screen with an energy and an edge that was obvious to everyone.
It's your little boy, Sammy, coming home from Alabama. Put on those eggs and hammy. Don't flim-flammy, mammy. Oh, mammy. Oh, mammy. Oh, mammy.
Now, I know for a fact Lou Costello used to stand backstage and make notes when Curly worked. And if you stop and think about it, there was a lot of Curly and Lou Costellos.
Which third man did you like to work with most, and why? My younger brother, Curly.
Would you throw that gum away? Look, I got rid of it.
Curly was an individual of which he had no peers in his field of comedy. I can't express the delight in having him work with I and Larry, because this man was a gem of a performer.
We arrive in Hollywood in an hour.
Boy, I can hardly wait. Will I be a sensation in pictures?
I felt, and I've heard my dad say it, that he felt he was a genius at comedy. The scene in the short where he does all these facial expressions reacting to a clam jumping out of a bowl of clam chowder.
Just how do you explain the essence of that genius? Well, how do you define the indefinable? Like a comic hurricane blowing in from parts unknown, Curly defies easy description. He has to be experienced, not to be understood, to be appreciated. He always appeared to be just a yuck or two away from the nut house.
Oh, Larry, the cheese!
He had these unique abilities as a comedian, and he was a big guy and silly and was in the middle of the mayhem.
You know, Curly was fat and looked like he was made out of rubber, you know, and you could smack him around, it wouldn't do anything.
Curly is a force of nature. Curly is hard to define because there's no one else like him. There really is no one else like him in screen comedy that I can think of. There were other comedians who were childlike or even childish, but he was a really interesting combination of being childlike in his reactions and grimaces and body English, but also very much an adult with an eye for pretty women.
Oh, Admiral.
And a grown-up sensibility.
Wouldn't you like to come and sit down?
Would I? Let's go over and find a dark corner. No. It's the kid.
Just a great, great comedian. Incredibly funny. Naturally funny.
Well, Curly was a genius in my way.
What was he like off stage?
Liking me, a nut. A real nut.
It's a wide open setup with us, like for instance Curly. You couldn't write for him because he wasn't a good study. If he forgot some words, you know, what he had to say, he'd fall down on the floor and go spinning around like a top till he remembered what he had to say. It wasn't planned for him to lay on the floor and do that. I always wondered about that. We never even knew what he was going to do.
Relentlessly inventive and remarkably intuitive. Even Curly didn't seem to know what he was going to do until he did it.
Gee, the water's cold.
At the heart of it all lay a puzzling paradox. Curly was so sweet, and yet could be so snide. He was so naive, and yet could be so knowing. He was so ungainly, and yet could be so graceful. The boy with the man's body, and the man with the boy's soul.
Come on in. Gee, the water is just wonderful. Water?
Maybe he's got something here.
You think I'm crazy? Come on, try it. The last one in is an old man. Come on.
Babe, that little boy from Bath Beach, had never really gone away, and it was the quality that endeared him to his audiences and created his enduring image.
The first time I saw them, I was probably 12 years old, and I saw them downtown in a huge theater off of Broadway, and there was kind of like Vaudeville before they actually had the movie. And I went with some girlfriends, and everybody was like, "Oh my God, that was your father." And, you know, it was probably the first time that I really got that, oh my God, my father was an actor and a comedian.
But reality is never as simple or as satisfying as the movies. For the man who was Curly and Jerome and Babe, combining those three personalities proved a daunting challenge. Curly, the eternal youth, was like Peter Pan, the boy who never grew up, and that childlike charm served him well on film. But on the highways and byways of the real world, that same character trait too often emerged as a streak of childish, sometimes even infantile behavior. Like his father Saul, Curly seemed unable to cope with the demands of everyday life. And so, like Saul, he chose to dwell in a world of his own making. But for father and son, those worlds were very different places. Saul had sought refuge in his religion. Curly, however, was fond of more secular things, like drinking, carousing, and carrying on.
Won't you take your coat off and be comfortable?
He had once been a popular ladies' man long ago in Brooklyn, and that hadn't stopped. He was, as always, the life of the party.
He was a ladies' man, you know. He was a ladies' man, liked to party, liked to dance. You know, there are lots of those souls in our business.
Larry and Mo were playing cards, which they did a lot. And Curly raced into the room and said, "Remember the last time we were here, that woman I met, and she rolled me?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Hide me, she's downstairs."
I think he had a love of life, and I think he had a lot of fun in his life.
Salty language, late nights, and devil-may-care attitude were his stock in trade, something that even extended to his relationship with the family.
When Curly was invited over to the house, I'm sure my dad read him the riot act. Be careful how you speak in front of Joni and Helen. And consequently, I don't remember Curly saying too much when he came over to the house. I think he was scared to death.
Curly was always slipping money to me. That was his way of treating me well. He'd always slip a quarter to me. "Here, kid, go buy something," you know? Or he'd go out with me and buy me something.
It's been said that Curly had almost no close friends and yet couldn't stand to be alone. And that, although he craved company, he was always more comfortable with his dogs than with people.
When I was with Curly many times, he had a dog. He had a definite love of dogs.
On any given Sunday afternoon in our backyard, when everybody was enjoying the barbecue, the swimming pool, Uncle Curly, way away from the crowd, was right here on his chaise lounge, just talking with his dog Biff. And this just might be the key to understanding the melancholy that permeated his personal life, a sense of isolation and of loneliness.
My mother remarried. I had a stepfather. He was a terrific father to me. I felt like if I, called Curly my father, he might feel bad, and I just didn't want that. I have a blood connection, but I really never had that fatherly connection, which now I wish maybe I had, because I probably missed getting to really know him.
He was a man-child, indeed, the little boy who never adjusted to being an adult and whose self-indulgent and ultimately self-destructive lifestyle perhaps grew from a longing that could never be fulfilled and a sadness that could never be forgotten.
Maybe he ran away from those situations with drinking.
It's sad to think that somebody who was so funny and who brought so much happiness to an awful lot of people didn't easily find happiness in his own life.
Yes, happiness always seemed to elude Curly, the man who exemplified innocent joy on the screen. And yet, that personal sadness never seemed to darken the bright and brilliant film persona, at least in the 1930s, that high noon of his comedic prime. There he was, a non-stop parade of cartoon noises, crazy gyrations, and clownish strutting. Though, like so much about Curly, these silly walks were not as simple as they seemed.
When you watch the old shorts, Mo will whistle for him, and he'll stop and he'll pivot on one foot, and then he'll hop along. Little things like that, you didn't understand what was going on. You just thought, wow, what a great choice, Why did he do that?
Do you remember the Chatham Farm and Babe's contradictory love of animals and of hunting? Well, it was a hunting accident that caused an injury that would forever affect his life. You see, his rifle unexpectedly discharged, and the bullet entered his ankle. My father, there as always to protect his baby brother, rushed the teenager to the doctor, who treated the wound but recommended surgery to permanently repair the injury. Babe, deathly afraid of hospitals and operations, refused, and the decision left him with a lifelong limp, the genesis of all the many Curly walks that were designed to disguise his disability.
I know that he was also in a lot of pain from that injury that he had on the farm where he shot himself in the foot. You can see him as he runs through the shorts. He's always running in like in a little circle, trying to take the weight off of that foot. So I feel he was a sad person.
A sad person and a comic genius. A man with so much private pain, and a man who gave so much pleasure to the public.
He was like a speeding bullet. People talk about him as the prototype for like the John Belushis and the Chris Farleys, and it was sort of a through line, and that was the unfortunate sacrifice of having a trio where there's one sprawling, out-of-control guy that colors outside the lines. But he must have known he was loved. He must have loved doing those shorts.
And it was only a question of time before the laughter turned to tears. Yes, in the midst of all this comedy, there were the seeds of tragedy. And as that tragedy played out, it would profoundly affect our family and the still living legend of Curly, the wildest Stooge of them all. But in the 1930s, that final curtain was still in the future. These were the golden years, and Mo, Larry, and Curly were on top of their games and enjoying ever-growing success, both artistically and commercially.
Mo, Larry, and Curly were artists. They were working actors. And there weren't that many of them. I mean, they were all sort of concentrated, it seemed, in Hollywood, and that's where you went. And if you saw them, oh my God, here's a big deal.
And the credit for so much of this excellence belonged to the boys themselves, in front of the camera, obviously, but behind it as well. because many of the story ideas were theirs, and much of the dialogue was improvised by this fabulously funny trio.
The next time you watch a short, pay attention to the dialogue. Really focus in on the dialogue.
We had writers, but then they would take us to a situation and say the Stooges do their stuff.
And away they'd go. And from that came some just phenomenal little pieces of dialogue that you miss being caught up in the zaniness.
Now, what can I do for you, Toots?
I'm in a terrible dilemma.
Yeah, I don't care much for these foreign cars either.
What's that thing for? You never can tell, we might meet up with a bear.
Yeah, meet my bare hand. Get out.
Even the notoriously cheap Harry Cohn took notice, increasing the budgets, extending the schedules, hiring top-drawer directors, and incorporating location shooting into the productions.
Here you are, lady. Where'll I put it? Now, you can put that piece in your pocket. Yeah. Hey, Mo! Look!
How do you like that? We forgot to allow for shrinkage.
Free sample. Go, go.
Many of the shorts were shot at the Columbia Ranch. Columbia gained confidence in the Stooges so that the guys had a little bit more money to go out to shoot in different locations.
He's crazy! Oh! I'll bust the Boston! So's your old man!
Some of those locations are actually still around today.
And these images offer a window into a bygone Los Angeles, a depression world that now seems as distant as a dream.
I'll get this one. Yeah.
And though Columbia used as many existing sets as they could, recycling props and costumes from feature films whenever possible, after all, nothing was going to turn Harry Cohn into the last of the big-time spenders. The two-reelers of the 30s still represent the zenith of the Stooge art, and a cash cow for Columbia.
Some theaters found that the Stooges were really popular and that they could actually advertise and promote those shorts very successfully. You'll see some still photos of old marquees of theaters around the country where the Stooges are billed on the marquee along with the feature film. They were definitely a draw.
And so, perhaps it's a good idea to visit that pinnacle and take a detailed look at one of the best comedy shorts of the period, in this case, 1936's Disorder in the Court.
Well, Disorder in the Court is certainly one of their classics. And they have the perfect personas for them. They're like jive-talking musicians, particularly Curly.
We were tearing up some hot swing music in the orchestra. Gail over there was swinging her fans. Her sweetie, Kirk Robin, was inhaling a bottle of hooch at a table. And a hoofer by the name of Buck Wing was getting ready to shake his tootsies.
Kindly speak English and drop the vernacular.
Vernacular? That's a doiby.
Their personas were kind of elastic in that they could be plumbers or hipsters, you know. But that one had everything. It had a great musical number. They even had a sexy dance routine. They worked a lot of gags around the music. The timing is perfect. They share the humor. They have jokes that don't involve them with the jury. So everybody's involved.
How could Gail Tempest's frail little finger pull the rusty trigger of that instrument of destruction?
See, there was nothing in it.
Broad Lane, 9972, after 5 o'clock.
The joke ratio's got to be like one every 3 seconds.
He grabs Kirk by the neck like that, see? And drags him over to the letterpress, see?
Curly's head in the vice is a classic moment.
Then he smacks him on the head like that. Then he pokes his coconut into the letterpress, see? Like that. Then he says, I'll squeeze the cider out of your Adam's apple. Then he gives him the works like this.
He had been in a lot of situations with the Stooges where what they did to him in real life would have been not just painful but fatal.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is...
In the plot, the parrot plays a key role.
Quiet, Polly.
They stall that perfectly. I mean, they cut back to him and everything. They don't reveal it to the end.
Look, there's a note tied to the parrot's foot. Come on, Polly, 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 Polly. Come on, Polly, Polly, Polly.
There's a scene where the parrot causes all the chaos in the courtroom. They have to get the hose out to drench it down so it can't fly. It's just classic.
Shut that off.
Ready? Hold it.
Disorder in the Court was, as so many of the two-reelers of the 1930s were, a miniature masterpiece. It featured all the elements that were to make the Stooge shorts a shining example of film comedy art. And just what were these essential elements? Well, they were numerous, and they were all necessary to assure that each of these movies was a little comic gem.
A bride never crosses her threshold by herself.
You're right, little dumpling.
Oh.
If we begin with the most visible component, then pride of place must be awarded to the army of actors who populated the many roles required by almost 200 two-reelers.
These people are staying all night. Give them rooms.
Professor Bilbo, the great magician.
What are you mugs doing here?
Moe, Larry, and Curly were undoubtedly and deservedly the stars,
Yes, and either you get out and get a job or I'll get a divorce.
but their performances benefited mightily from the contributions of a repertory company of reliable comedians.
It was the heyday of the shorts department for Columbia, and there was a lot of great talent in the shorts department, many of which appeared throughout the years.
I beg your pardon.
And many of these characters are great foils of the Three Stooges in many of their shorts. The Three Stooges were fortunate to have that body of talent available.
My father, in particular, was always eager to give credit to this often unsung and yet always indispensable group of actors.
We had these people work with us mostly continuously because then they begin to understand us, and we knew them, and things ran smoothly. No matter what you did, there was always something like if one of us thought of something funny, we had a cue where they say, "Now wait a minute." And then he'd say something funny. If it wasn't funny, he'd get a crack on the head.
Now, it seems unfair not to mention them all by name. But since that's impossible, let's single out a few favorites.
A duck is calling his mate from the Toolies.
Having gotten his start in the silent era, Vernon Dent didn't get much of a chance to talk, but he made up for lost time with the Stooges, delivering delicious line readings as officious dimwits and easily flabbergasted authority figures.
Come here, my little Edelweiss. Sit on my lap.
What lad?
I don't want a coat. I don't want a coat. I don't want a coat!
Oh, he don't want a coat. What he wants is a pair of our slick slacks.
Why don't you tell me the man wants slacks? Get him slacks.
And another silent screen veteran, Bud Jameson, stole many a scene playing cops, crooks, and generally cranky guys.
What do you request? How about a last smoke? All right, but when the smoke is finished, so are you.
The evocatively named Simona Boniface was, like Margaret Dumont with the Marx Brothers, the domineering dowager of one's dreams. And her regal pomposity was often rewarded with a pie on the kisser.
He did it.
Thank you. But you started it.
And who doesn't love Christine McIntyre? a regular who played good girls and bad broads with equal aplomb.
Take it easy, sister. We're looking for a guy named Dapper.
Dapper? I never heard of him. I'm all alone.
Good. I mean, we'll check on that. Look everywhere, men. Keep your mind on your business.
And who proved in microphonies that she could sing. Oh, no, 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 I mean it. She could actually sing. And the list goes on, including many like Dorothy Appleby, Gene Roth, Phil Van Zandt, and Dick Curtis, who had originally been dramatic actors, but who demonstrated impeccable comic pedigrees in the Stooge shorts. And to the roll of honor can be added the names of the anything but little Tiny Gates, the mad Russian Ivan Bustov,
Well, here's a go.
and that master of the double take, Dudley Dickerson. And then there's the Triple Crown trio of Marjorie White, Cy Shindell, and Kenneth MacDonald. Future stars also cut their actorial teeth with Moe, Larry, and Curly. Walter Brennan, Lloyd Bridges, and the much-loved Lucille Ball.
What are you studying at college?
Pig Latin. Atwe aye uye uinde unite. You wouldn't know a thing about that, would you?
Oh, nay.
And then there was Emil Sitka, who in later years became such a frequent co-star that he is sometimes referred to as the fourth Stooge.
No levity, please. Emil Sitka, for people who don't know, he was a young guy that played old men back in the 30s. So when he got old, you never noticed the change because he was always playing these rickety old codgers. I can hear him saying, "Hold hands, you lovebirds.
Hold hands, you lovebirds.
All of a sudden, I'm cast in a thing called a Three Stooge comedy. And then I see three little guys about a head shorter than I am, weird looking. I can't believe it. They're called Stooges.
Celery, sir?
That was with Curly and Moe and Larry and Hapwood's Holiday.
Mr. Howard.
Sitka also occupies an important footnote in Stooge history, one that is both ironic and tragic.
Yeah.
But more on that later. No actor, no matter how gifted, exists in a vacuum. Equally ingenious writers and directors are required to create comic excellence, and the Stooges were blessed with the chance to collaborate with top-notch talents in both departments.
We always had bull sessions, and talk about pictures and what we'd like to do, and we wrote the treatments for all the pictures. That's a 9-page treatment of which a scenario writer, like you see the names, Felix Adler, Clyde Bruckman, Del Lord, Eddie Burns, Elwood Ullman. They did the script form, the shooting script. Then we'd get it back and see that they didn't put the wrong words in the right mouth or the right words in the wrong mouth. Or have Larry talk tough to me, which didn't go, you see.
We would have a conference with the producer. As a writer, producer, they said, what do you think we ought to do this time? I said, well, let's make a Western. That sounds pretty good. So we'd kick ideas around, get going on a Western. Or I'd say, let's make a horror story, a spoof on a horror picture in a haunted house. That's good, too. Or we'd make a picture in Surefire involving a guy in a gorilla suit. Whatever. Just so it was open to gags and laughs.
Wait for Papa, baby. Hey, baby.
As I mentioned before, the boys contributed many story ideas, with my dad being by far the most active in script meetings. But those ideas needed development and polish, and toiling away behind the typewriters were a crew of creative scribblers, including Felix Adler.
Now, whenever you're ready, serve the drinks and don't forget the canopies.
Canopies? Oh, you mean the toast with the lace curtains?
Such levity. You remind me of the Three Stooges.
Hey, that's an insult.
No.
Elwood Ullman.
You see, I had a good reason.
Were you ever indicted?
Not since I was a baby, Your Honor.
and Clyde Bruckman, who had once worked with Buster Keaton.
We don't know anything about flying.
Neither did the Wright brothers, but they flew. Anything the Wright brothers can do, the Wrong brothers can do. Right?
Right, wrong. Brothers?
And behind the cameras sat a diverse group of dedicated directors, each of whom brought their own distinctive styles to the Columbia comedies. As with the so-called bit players, there are just too many directors to discuss them all in detail. But several deserve special mention. Del Lord, Preston Black, and Ray McHarry helmed the first Stooge comedies, setting a high standard for all that was to come.
I think they worked especially well in the 1930s with some of the silent comedy veterans who really knew what they were doing. Del Lord, one of the greatest comedy directors who ever lived, who trained at the Max Sennett studio, which was a birthplace of so much comedy. He and the Stooges made a great, great team.
Charlie Chase had enjoyed a brief but brilliant career as a silent film comedian, a career so noteworthy that some critics insist his name belongs to that select group headlined by Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, and Harold Lloyd. Chase drew upon his pre-talkie roots when he took his post on the other side of the camera, designing elegant and elaborate sight gags and serving up seamless slapstick.
Jump! Come on! Get the girl! Come on!
Mo, where's your hat?
Visual gags were also favored by Edward Burns.
How you doing?
But this director also stressed strong storylines and clever characters.
Get your hand out of my face.
Edward Burns, who'd been a sound engineer, who'd worked with them on and off, had aspirations to become a writer and director and cut his teeth on their two reel comedies. And he brought sort of the best of both worlds. He understood visual comedy, but he tried to put a little more story and a little more construction and logic into what they did, and ended up making some of their better later comedies.
This was not surprising for a man who would later go on to direct feature films, including two sci-fi hits of the 1950s, Return of the Fly and the underrated World Without End, as well as the camp classic Queen of Outer Space, starring none other than Zsa Zsa Gabor. And no discussion of the subject is complete without a consideration of Jules White. He became the most often employed of all the Stooge directors, and this made perfect sense. After all, he was essentially hiring himself. That's because White had been made head of Columbia's short subject division in 1933 and had produced much of the Stooges' output, including the Oscar-nominated Men in Black. As a Columbia producer, White gave himself free rein in the director's chair, and this affected his style. Because of all the men who helmed the two-reelers, it was White who was most enamored of extreme and excessive violence. This filmmaker seemed addicted to spectacular spasms of grotesque and violent slapstick, with some of the gags, especially those featuring sharp, pointy objects and soft, unprotected bodies, bordering on the brutal. And while these painful feats are pricelessly funny today, at the time, they were tough going. According to my dad, the boys sustained numerous injuries while making the comedies. Broken noses, chipped teeth, cracked ribs, and so on. And that the infirmary was always a lot more crowded during a Jules White shoot.
Larry lost a couple of teeth, so did I. I had broken my ribs several times.
I thought of him as being invincible. I think he had one cold in his life. Didn't realize he was going through all this other stuff.
Curly had stitches in his head about 3 or 4 times.
From just falling around in the movies?
Well, you see, they were all accidents. In other words, we did a picture, and I tipped the table, and Curly was so heavy that his head hit the edge of the windowsill. And there was 9 stitches in the head. Wow. So you see, you can't Then there was once where we built an airplane inside of a garage, and I was on the propeller. Right. And swung me around. And finally I got smashed off of that thing. They never showed it, but I flew off of that thing and smashed a couple of ribs.
I thought they, the scene where like Larry would start it and then you'd be spinning around on the propeller, I thought that was done with a dummy or something attached to the propeller.
No.
They really did it with you and then just speeded it up or what?
Yeah, it was a speed shot.
Oh.
Jules White would never spend any money on a double.
Larry had a scene where he ducked under the water and came up with a frog on his head. He did it and the frog jumped off. So they said, well, let's try to glue him on. So they tried to glue him on and the frog jumped off. So they finally figured they'd wire him on and cover it and whatever. And the frog stayed there. But the frog didn't like it, went, and they have claws. Simple. Larry's hair is torn apart like that, and it never grew back. That's a lot of where the hair loss went, that frog.
Larry, though, had a very practical viewpoint when asked later about this literally sore subject.
Did you ever get hurt? Well, sure, you have to get hurt, he said. But the pain goes away on payday. The pain goes away on payday.
So what kind of a director was White, really?
Mary Bell! Ring a bell! Oh, we're engaged! Congratulations!
Well, perhaps you can get a glimpse of his style by watching him at work in this rare behind-the-scenes footage.
Oh boy, I hope I win this contest.
Director Edward Burns had begun his career in radio during that medium's pioneering days and had come to Hollywood with the advent of talking pictures. In fact, before he took the director's reins, he had been a highly respected sound engineer at Columbia, and as such helped concoct, along with brilliant sound engineer Joe Henrich, the unique sonic flair of the Stooge films. Moe, Larry, and Curly, for all their indisputed command of physical visual comedy, would not have been nearly as compelling as silent film performers. Why? The delectable dialogue? Of course. Those hilarious working-class New York and Philadelphia accents? Absolutely. The memorable musical numbers? Certainly.
The Frenchman knows just what to eat. He eats something so nice and sweet. Lollipop, lollipop, lollipop.
But there was something else, and you recognize it as soon as you hear it. Yes, it's that ear-catching cascade of sound effects that heighten the impact of every conk, crunch, and crash.
That's a dot, dash, dash,
Hey, cut it out.
Making every filmic poke and punch resonate like a full-scale riot.
The talkies came into play just about the same time that the Three Stooges became popular in doing their shorts in the 1930s. And sound was really, really important.
The Columbia Sound Department was one of the best in the business thanks to Edward Burns and others like him, and the unit developed an endlessly expanding inventory of ear-grabbing effects, surprising audiences with an ever-inventive collection of creative noises.
The eye pokes and the bops and the banks, all those things that you hear were very unique sound effects that the Columbia Sound Effects Department was genius in developing. You have Curly getting hit over the head with a hammer. Now, what is that going to sound like?
Yeah, that's all right.
Columbia's sound effects people were able to come up with a perfect...
They were funny, they were inventive, And they became part of the Stooge vocabulary. You expected them after a while.
And since a punning picture is often worth 1,000 sounds, we also have to remember the treasurable titles like Disorder in the Court, Loco Boy Makes Good, and Yes, We Have No Bonanza, plus the priceless signs that pop up in the most unexpected places.
The great hypnotist, Sven Garland.
And so, putting it all together, it's easy to see why the Stooge shorts were a hit then and remain comedy classics now, just as dynamic and delightful as ever.
Look, it's an inkwell.
Inkwell nothing. Why, that's Earl.
Earl? Sure, coal Earl. You mean oil? It's a geezer. An oil geezer.
Yes, Columbia Pictures and their terrific trio had struck it rich.
Her entertainment is certainly novel.
It meant continuing commercial success for the studio and enduring artistic achievement for the boys.
Your entertainment is a huge success. How did you ever think of it?
Why, I saw them in Vaudeville.
Oh, how clever! Everything was so very wonderful.
Well, Eddie?
You were perfectly wonderful, you funny men. Oh, you must come on the fox hunt with us.
It meant that the names Moe, Larry, and Curly would live forever. And it also meant that the Stooges were simply too popular with the public to be confined to the silver screen. Harry Cohn obviously was not allergic to the idea of making money. Keeping the Stooges busy on film was one way of padding Columbia's bank account. And sending them out on personal appearances was another. Back in 1934, when he drew up the initial contract, Cohn inserted a clause enabling Moe, Larry, and Curly to tour as a live act whenever their shooting schedule allowed it.
The good part about the Columbia deal was that they worked out their shooting schedule so that they would make the films all in a group and then go out and tour in vaudeville, where they could make a buck and where they could also increase their popularity by, being seen in person by lots of fans all over the country and even outside the country.
And it was good for them because it enabled them to make extra money that they didn't make at Columbia. And Columbia was good enough to allow the guys to go out and supplement their income through a very active live stage show presence.
This was good for the boys. It increased their incomes. And it was good for Columbia because it provided plenty of publicity for one of the studio's most profitable assets. And so the Stooges hit the road all during the 1930s, offering live performances, participating in benefits, and revisiting their old stomping grounds, vaudeville.
Sitting in the front row of a theater, he would perch me there before he would go backstage to join the other fellows, Larry and Curly. And there was something very exciting about it. Live music coming from the orchestra pit, sitting there and feeling special. It was very, very exciting.
Yes, those were the days when there still was life in good old vaudeville as it entered the final act of its heyday. The circuit may have been more limited than it had been at its height, having lost many theaters to the fall of the stock market and the rise of the movies. But the comics and the chorus girls carried on nonetheless. And these live shows were finding a growing number of their most popular attractions among the stars of motion pictures, the medium that would ironically seal vaudeville's doom. So it was with the Stooges. They toured the U.S. playing to sold-out houses, those theaters packed with all the people who wanted to see their favorite film funny men in the flesh.
Well, I saw them at the Strand Theater many, many years ago. They used to have 5, 6 shows a day with a movie. To see them in person was like an extra thrill for a kid. I must have been about 14 years old. And I knew I was going to sit through the whole day. So I saw them, and they didn't miss a bounce. They didn't miss nothing. Everything was just, it was like an orchestration, because they knew what they were doing. This wasn't just like, don't forget to do that. They knew. It was, again, like a rhythm. They came out there, they were funny.
And these holidays from Columbia weren't just confined to their own country. You've heard of the Norman Conquest. Well, in 1939, Moe, Larry, and Curly mounted an invasion of their own, taking the British Isles by storm. And they were held over at London's famous Palladium. And they wowed audiences in Glasgow and Dublin. Then it was back to the States for a triumphant return to Broadway in The George White Scandals of 1939. It had been 7 years since the boys had appeared on The Great White Way, but they hadn't lost their touch. One critic summed up the team's contribution this way: "The Three Stooges rushed bellicosely in and out of the skits like a trio of inflamed Ferdinands in a meadow of catnip. Boy, they sure had a way with words in them days." And so, as the boys basked in the warm glow of hard-won success, they must have imagined that nothing could ever darken their days again. But a shadow was soon to fall over my father, caused by the first of many clouds that were beginning to appear on the horizon. Because as the Stooges were traveling from triumph to triumph, another journey was about to come to an end. And destiny decided that this ending was not to be a happy one.